Welcome to the Trinity Channel. My name is Dr. Tony Costa, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. And today we're going to be addressing a very interesting question, a question that has been raised many times by Muslims against Christians and Jews, and that is the question, is Muhammad mentioned in the Bible? Now, some of you might be wondering, if you're a Christian, you're watching this program, you're probably wondering, where in the world does that idea come from? Why would anybody think that Muhammad's mentioned in the Bible? And it's a very good question, and it's a very good question that we need to address, and that's because that many Muslims today try to convince Jews and Christians, particularly Christians, that Muhammad is mentioned in the Bible, and because he's mentioned in the Bible, then Christians should be Muslims, and vice versa. Jews as well should also be Muslims, and so does the Bible really mention Muhammad? Is Muhammad mentioned in the Bible? If they're going to say that Muhammad is mentioned in the Bible, well, is Joseph Smith of the Mormon Church, was he predicted in the Bible? Well, Mormons would say he was. The members of the Baha'i faith would say that the founder, Baha'u'llah, is also mentioned in the Bible. Why can't we take the claims of the Mormons or the claims of the Baha'is just as equal statements, equal affirmations? Maybe Joseph Smith is predicted in the Bible. Maybe Santa Claus is predicted in the Bible. You see what I'm saying, folks, is you can make up anything you want. You can try to prove anything you want. You could say that Fred Flintstone is mentioned in the Bible. You can say whatever you want. But does the evidence bear up? Does the evidence show that, in fact, these things are true? And why do Muslims say Muhammad is mentioned in the Bible? Because that's a very strange statement, considering the fact that many of our Muslim friends would say that the Bible's been corrupted. Well, if the Bible's been corrupted and the Bible's not reliable, then why would an unreliable book mention Muhammad? Well, what we want to do is deal with this question, and we're going to be following a PowerPoint there on your screens, and we're going to be looking at the question, is Muhammad mentioned in the Bible? And so if you could follow along with me on the PowerPoint, that you could follow along on the screen. So let's look at this question, is Muhammad mentioned in the Quran? Now, first of all, why do Muslims make the claim that Muhammad is found in the Bible? Well, there's a couple of arguments that they put forward. They do this first and foremost to enhance the person of Muhammad, to show that Muhammad is really mentioned there, and this is an attempt again to centralize Muhammad. It's also intended to convince Jews and Christians, who are called the people of the book or people of the scripture, to convert to Islam, since Muhammad is the promised prophet predicted in the scriptures. So if he's in the scriptures, then the most logical thing Jews and Christians should do is become Muslims. And it's also intended to place Muhammad in the scriptural tradition and to align him with the biblical prophets, because if Muhammad is in the Bible and he's a prophet, well, then he follows in the line of the biblical prophets as well. Now, the reason why they say this is because the Quran itself mentions in Surah 7 and verse 157, it makes this claim: those who follow the apostle, the unlettered prophet, now this is a reference to Muhammad, whom they find mentioned in their own scriptures in the law and the gospel. So those who follow the unlettered prophet are the Jews and the Christians who have believed on him, who've essentially become Muslims. And then it says they will find him mentioned in their own scriptures. Notice it references here two of the scriptures, the law and the gospel, or the Torah and the Injil. In other words, the Torah and the gospel, which is believed to have been given, these were books in Islam, given respectively to Moses and to Jesus. In other words, what the Quran is saying is, Muhammad is mentioned in the Torah of Moses, and it is also mentioned, Muhammad is also mentioned in the Injil, that is, in the gospel of the Christians. So, the Quran makes that claim. The Quran makes that statement. And if that's the case, why is it that for 1400 years, 14 centuries, Jews and Christians have never found him. In fact, they've looked and looked and looked, and they can't find Muhammad anywhere. And so the Muslims have taken up the task of trying to use the Christian Bible or the Jewish Bible to try to show us where Muhammad is mentioned. So let's look at a couple considerations here in the next slide. I call this "you can't have your cake and eat it too" syndrome. What does that mean? Well, if the Quran claims that Muhammad is mentioned in the Bible, that is the Old and the New Testament, then does that not imply that the Bible is reliable? But Muslims claim that the Bible has been corrupted by both Jews and Christians. Muslims here are being inconsistent. When they quote the Bible to prove Muhammad is predicted therein and then argue that it is corrupted and untrustworthy, what type of an argument is that? Well, that's an inconsistent argument. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say Muhammad's mentioned in the Bible and then in another breath say you can't trust the Bible. The Bible's corrupted and therefore you cannot trust what it says. And so what ends up happening is our Muslim friends begin to play eeny, meeny, miny, mo. This verse stays, this verse goes. You can't do that. And as my good friend Dr. James White has said, and this rings true, quote, "An inconsistent argument is the sign of a failed argument," close quote. And he's absolutely right. If your argumentation is inconsistent, then you have failed in your argument. Because if you contradict yourself, you're not saying anything that is true. You're not saying anything that is valid. And so which one is it, my Muslim friends, if you're watching this program? Is the Bible reliable or is it not reliable? You can't have it both ways. It's a package deal. You can't pick and choose what you want. Now, if we as Christians go to your Quran and we pick and choose what we want out of the Quran and say the Quran proves this and the Quran proves that, but we won't accept this, what would you say? Well, you would say we're being inconsistent. You would say we're not being fair with your Quran. And what we're asking you is to return the privilege, return the favor. Be consistent with our Bible. Let it speak for itself. Don't put your words into it. Don't try to force Islamic theology into the Bible, just as we're not supposed to force Christian theology into the Quran. Let the text speak for themselves. Now, if we move on to the next slide, this is what I was talking about. We have selective reading of the Bible. And this way, Muslims operate the same way as the cults do. They selectively pick and choose what parts of the Bible agree with the Quran and which will serve their agenda and cause. And then they reject parts of the Bible that contradict Islamic teachings found in the Quran, like the death of Jesus on the cross, Jesus being the Son of God, Jesus being deity, and so forth. And see what the problem is here, folks? You're selectively picking and choosing what you want. And you can't do that. That's not consistency. You cannot do that with the Quran. You cannot do that with any text. And if you're going to do that, then you're showing disrespect and you're having a hidden agenda. And your hidden agenda is you just want to prove your point and simply use what benefits you and discard the rest. And so the Islamic standard that judges the Bible becomes the Quran. The Quran itself becomes the standard. And they take the Quran, which came 600 years after the Bible, and instead of using the Bible to test the Quran, they use the Quran to test the Bible. And of course, that's the wrong way of doing things. If something new comes along, you want to test it by what God has already given you. You don't discard what God has given you and then wait for a new revelation to come along and accept that. And so they've got it backwards. They've put the cart in front of the horse. And so you see, folks, the Bible is already presumed guilty by Muslims before they even read it. And you could tell by some of the calls we get into our shows, you will notice some Muslims will call in and they will attack certain Christian doctrines, and then when we ask them to have they read the Bible, they'll say only parts of it and etc. In other words, they simply have not taken the time to understand the Bible and understand it in its context and to engage it in a reasonable and a thoughtful manner. Well, let's move on to the next slide, and I'm going to deal with the three main passages that Muslims use to try to prove that Muhammad is in the Bible. There are many others that they use, but these are the three main passages that they use to show that Muhammad is predicted in the Bible. The first one is from Deuteronomy, And remember, the Quran said in Surah 7, Ayah 157, that Muhammad's mentioned in the law, that is the Torah. And so Muslims go to Deuteronomy, which is part of the Torah, and they will say Muhammad is actually mentioned in chapter 18 of Deuteronomy, verses 18 to 19. And then, remarkably enough, they go to another text known as the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs, which is a very strange place for them to go, because the Song of Solomon is not part of the law of Moses. It's part of the wisdom literature. It's part of the poetic books of the Bible. But they go to the Song of Solomon, and they actually claim that Muhammad's name is actually mentioned in that text. And then from the New Testament, what they do is they go to the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verses 16 to 17, and then verse 26, and then John chapter 15 and verse 26, and then lastly John 16, verse 7. And so they use those number 3 there, the last set of texts there from the New Testament. They use that in order to support that Muhammad is mentioned in the Injil, that is, in the Gospel. And this, of course, becomes very, very interesting, because this throws a monkey wrench into the whole thing, because Muslims generally, out of all the Gospels in the New Testament, Muslims generally are the most critical of John's Gospel because of its high view of Jesus and because of the deity of Christ. And that is very, very ironic that they will use that particular text. But again, you see, this becomes a sign of desperation when you'll use anything to suit your means. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to quote to you from Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 18 to 19. And this is what it says. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I command him. If anyone does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name, I myself will call him to account. So that's the first passage that they quote from Deuteronomy 18, verses 18 to 19. And here they claim that the prophet like you, that is, the prophet like Moses, that is going to be raised up from among their brothers, is Muhammad. That's who Muslims claim is being referred to. The prophet like Moses is Muhammad that is being referred to here. Now, of course, this poses a number of problems. And that is, who exactly is this prophet being spoken of here in Deuteronomy 18 to 19? Whoever this prophet is going to be like Moses. That's the first thing we want to notice. And so when we go over to the next slide, what was Moses like as a prophet? In Deuteronomy 34, verses 10 to 11, it says, "Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those miraculous signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his officials and to his whole land." Now, what is interesting here is that Moses is being described here as a prophet who did miraculous signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to do. So whoever this prophet is that is like Moses would be a prophet resembling Moses in what? In miraculous signs. Even the Quran admits in Surah 7, verses 103 to 118, it admits that Moses performed miraculous signs, that miraculous signs were wrought by the hands of Moses. And so whoever this prophet is, he has to be a prophet that would be like unto Moses, that is, showing signs and showing wonders. Is that Muhammad? Well, when we come back to our second part, we're going to deal with that and answer that question. Stay tuned.